I'm Klaudia Amenabar here with The Beat to talk about the MCU's latest film, Spider-Man: Far From Home. This is going to be a spoiler-filled review, so please don't watch this if you haven't already seen the movie. Make sure to like and subscribe to The Beat for more on the latest MCU movies and anything else that you want us to talk about.
You gonna be the next Iron Man now?
Well, no, I don't have time. I'm too busy doing your jobs.
What?
I'm kidding. Look, keep up the good work. Because I am going on vacation.
Overall, I really loved Spider-Man: Far From Home. I would put it in my top 10, really in my top 6. My top 5 includes, obviously, Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, you know, the classics. But overall, I think it carried on the really strong parts of Spider-Man: Homecoming, which are investing in the ways that Spidey is just a relatable teen, but also thinking about the socio-political implications of what the real world would be like with superheroes. I definitely think the movie's weakness was how it didn't really get to how teens act in this day and age. Shout out to the Gen Zers out there. And also how it mentioned and included a lot of socio-political issues with what would happen if superheroes were real, but it didn't dive into them enough. One of the best things that I liked was the continuity with Endgame. We all came out of Endgame with a lot of questions and a lot of tears, obviously. But sometimes when a big event like this happens in a movie and they try to do a sequel or reboot, they really try to start fresh in a way because they don't want to lean on the legacy or lean on the big events, and they want to have something new. And sometimes that works. A lot of times it just leaves people with a lot of questions about the original characters that they loved. They decided to just not do that and just pick up where they left off, which doesn't happen often in movies and felt very refreshing. They answered a lot of the questions that people had after Endgame, like what happened to classmates if some of them got snaptured and some didn't? Or what happened to the world when they realized that some heroes were lost? One of the MCU's problems as it worked out its kinks over the years was that it liked to show that it was interconnected, but not be over the top about it. And by the time it got to show that it was overtly connected, that was its strength and people really liked it. And the hinting got really annoying. What I really loved was that it embraced the interconnectedness of the MCU. It mentioned that Spidey went to space. It used all the cosmic stuff from Captain Marvel in the end credit scenes. It didn't just hint at it like most MCU movies do. It embraced it full on. One thing I really loved about this movie is that it continued the good elements of Homecoming that showed that MJ and Peter and all his friends were just regular teens. I think that was what brought Homecoming out as a frontrunner in the MCU, and this movie really continued that. They felt like real people, even amongst crazy circumstances and amongst all the crazy BS that happens in the MCU. The best part about this Spidey is that while he's powerful and he always saves the day, you still just want to protect him. And he's your small boy. He's just your Spidey. He's just a child. I just want him to be safe and happy. I think that a lot of that comes from Tom Holland and how great he is and how much I love him. I think all the young actors are really talented at making these characters feel real, especially Zendaya, who a lot of people have praised for being able to be such a grounded character in such a big blockbuster movie, which doesn't happen a lot. A lot of people have talked about how it's really refreshing to see a young black teenager get to be quirky, because we never get to see that in movies. But we also get to see her be a love interest without being that manic pixie dream girl or some sort of girl on a pedestal for Peter. I think another one of Far From Home's big strengths was its villain. I think most of these strong MCU movies are the ones that have the best villains. Your Killmongers, your Hellas. I think Mysterio, whether you knew the plot twist about him or not, was compelling from the jump. And again, I think that comes a lot from Jake Gyllenhaal and his acting. and also that he's hot and that I love him. There were some conceptual issues with the Mysterio character and his plot twist that I'll get to later, but I think it brought a lot of depth that there was a character we didn't know very much about who we instantly were interested and wanted to see more of on the screen. He was magnetic to watch. And whether that was on purpose, as we saw later, that he wanted everyone to look at him, it was interesting to watch him opposite Spider-Man in that at first he was trying to be a very good Superman type character, and then he was almost a hammy villain. And watching that opposite Spidey, who's very unsure of himself and he isn't really a grown-up yet, was just an amazing on-screen dynamic. And I think that also speaks again to the actors and their chemistry on screen.
Who is that guy?
He's like Iron Man and Thor rolled into one.
He's no Spider-Man.
What is it with you and Spider-Man?
What, he looks out for the neighborhood, has a dope suit, and I really respect him. Sup, dickwad?
I really appreciated how this movie was genuinely funny. Some MCU movies really struggle with, oh haha, we're quipping, we're making funny lines, I'm Tony Stark. But this movie actually knew how to put comedy in there without it being ham-fisted. It really started from the jump with that in memoriam sequence with the Getty images and the Comic Sans. I think it really took advantage of the fact that sometimes superhero situations, they're ridiculous and that can be funny and that's okay to laugh at yourself. And it's really refreshing to see the MCU be able to start laughing at itself without it being super cringy, which has happened a bunch in the past. And it not just wildly flip back and forth between being serious and being funny. It felt real, that sometimes things are awkward and they're funny, and sometimes things are serious, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive. I do want to address the Spider-Verse elephant in the room. There was another Spider-Man movie that came out almost this year, and it was the best superhero movie ever made. Now, obviously, I don't think Far From Home comes anywhere close, but I do think it comes close as a good Spider-Man movie. I really appreciated how it gave me the same feeling of hope and also love for Spidey in that I want to protect this child with everything, but also that feeling of anyone can wear the mask and that childlike wonder. I do think this movie suffered a little bit too much from its emphasis on Tony Stark, but I will say one of its strengths was how it realistically showed Peter's grief. He was confused, he was traumatized by a really horrible experience in space, and he just wanted to get back to normal life, and they emphasized that throughout the movie, and it felt like a very real reaction. Sometimes in the MCU movies especially, I often ask, well, how would this real person feel after all these horrible things? And I was really glad that this movie addressed that with Spidey.
Everywhere I go, I see his face. I just really miss him.
Yeah, I miss him too.
So now I want to get into some of the things that I didn't like. And keep in mind, I'm not trying to rag on the movie. Overall, I really liked it, and it's one of my favorites. Again, one of the biggest detriments to this movie and to the last Spider-Man movie was its overemphasis on Tony. I thought maybe after Homecoming they would step away from that and let Peter shine on his own. But even in death, Tony Stark loomed large, and in ways sometimes that narratively didn't make sense. The grief made sense. The grief for Tony Stark, the man that he loved, made sense, and it was done very well. The whole emphasis on the Iron Man legacy was a little heavy-handed and also didn't make sense in universe because there were many people who didn't like him. In Civil War, there was a woman who tracked him down after a speech and confronted him. Not everyone in this world likes Tony Stark, and I'm sure most non-Americans didn't either. But for some reason, this movie emphasized that the world missed him so much and that Peter had to be him. And maybe that was because it was supposed to feel like Peter had to be him. But it ended up just detracting from giving Peter his own story. It seemed a little unfair that people kept asking who's going to be the next Iron Man, but there wasn't any mass mourning for Cap. We saw him in the In Memoriam, but other than that, we didn't see murals of him. We didn't see Spidey saying, oh, do I want to be him, even though he didn't know him that well. It just seemed, again, overemphasis on Tony Stark, even after we should have moved away from that after the first movie. Overall, when I walked out of this movie, I was mad at Tony Stark. He started all of this by recruiting a 16-year-old kid to fight his little pissant battle in an airport parking lot with his adult friends, and it was wrong. And then he continued to put all of his complexes about his legacy onto this kid, and then somehow it kept going even after he was dead, and it made me angry for this kid. And maybe that was the point, but it ended up being annoying to watch. The next thing that really felt off to me in this movie was how they over-sexualized children, and mostly Peter in this movie. A lot of times the MCU likes to be really awkward about how it puts in romance and sexuality to very mixed results, as many people know. Sometimes it does very well, and sometimes it just makes no sense, like in Civil War. The problem is that their tendency to do that doesn't work as well when it's a movie about kids, and they didn't seem to grasp that. I really like the stuff with MJ and Peter, and I think it's one of the few times that the MCU has done romance well. That being said, when they tried to put in sexuality like they do for older male characters, it ended up just being very creepy. He's a 16-year-old kid, and everyone's making jokes about him being an escort. They're bringing in a sexy woman to have an awkward moment with him, like it's an Austin Powers movie. One of his classmates tried to blackmail him, thinking that he had been taken advantage of. There was just a lot of creepy moments that really took out of the wholesome, very hopeful, and teenager-friendly moments that just felt kind of gross to watch. I have to commend this movie for how they really tried to reflect the diversity of a class from Queens. They had a girl with a hijab. They had their first openly trans actor, and that was wonderful. The problem was it started to look a little bit college brochure-y because this is 10 years of films about white dudes, and this was still a film about a white dude. And most people of color in all these movies have been either sidekicks or just background dressing, which is what happened in this movie. Until there are more MCU protagonists of color, this is going to still feel like tokenism.
I ask you to simply make it smaller.
Okay, sir, and that's what we're trying to do, but honestly, it's impossible.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
I praised Mysterio as the villain, and I think he's very interesting, and I really like the implications of talking about what's real and what's fake news. That being said, the real villain wasn't just him. The villain was a union, basically, which, coming from a company as big and that has done as many bad things as Disney, seemed very dystopian to watch. They painted employees who had been wronged as just being disgruntled and turning evil, and it became increasingly uncomfortable. While there were so many great youths moments with the teens in this movie, I still think the MCU has yet to grasp how teens actually act and what they like. For example, most of the music in the movie came out before these kids were even born, and it really emphasized the fact that these are adults looking in on kids and not a movie about high schoolers organically. There was a joke about AC/DC and how he might not know some of this music, but in general, it just felt very off to how teens actually act and what they actually like. They also love to do that thing of, oh, look at these teens with their technology. We had the one character live streaming himself all the time, and that was a big joke, but technology isn't just integral to teens, and it seems like, other than demonizing it with the whole fake news and editing video plot, we didn't see the good side of how teenagers interact with it, or even the neutral side of how it just permeates into their lives. Lately, there have been a lot of really good movies about teens and Gen Z that really capture how they use technology and show them in a compassionate light. And I hoped that a movie about Spider-Man, who's a beloved teenager, might follow in those footsteps. But I think this movie really missed the mark in showing how teens actually act. There were a couple glimmers of this, like with the In Memoriam For a new franchise about a character who is a teen, I would hope that they would have a little bit more connection with how modern kids and Gen Z actually use technology. I wanted to see MJ with like a popular Instagram meme account. I wanted to see them like making TikToks with Spidey for fun. I wanted to see them do the kind of fun BS that teens do. Overall, my negative feelings about this movie were nitpicks. I really liked it. I think the performances are really good. The villain is one of my favorites in the MCU. It holds up as a good Spidey movie, even up against Spider-Verse. And despite fuck Tony Stark and him being everything in this movie, I think it tied in well with Endgame and the rest of the MCU. Before we go, I do want to talk about J. Jonah Jameson and his little Alex Jones InfoWars cameo. Obviously, it gave me a lot of anxiety to watch at the end, and I'm worried about my poor boy Peter, but I do think it was an interesting and very apt way to include this classic character. I know that he's included in the video game like this, and I think that comparing him and framing him like Alex Jones, who is a real person who threatens and harasses children and teens who survive traumatic events, is a really good way to contextualize this kind of ridiculous character from the comics. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe and tell us everything you liked or didn't like or just felt meh about in the comments. You've been watching The Beat. We're just getting started.